Oh, is it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Some are not as exciting as this one. Terry, this is Justin.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right.
She was.
We'll start this meeting in just a moment. Of course, it's Howard.
Do you know, is this one, or maybe you want me to raise this as a question?
I'm sorry?
Maybe you want me to raise this as a question. Is this a full room divider, or is that just a
Yes,
catwalk?
as far as I know, it's compliant at
Okay.
this point.
One reminder, after the Liquor Commission, we're going to have the APA presentation of the planning board.
Call to order a regular meeting for the normal local liquor commission. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos?
Here.
Mr. Fritzen?
Here.
Mr. McBride?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here. First order of business is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of July 16th, 2018. Move approval.
Second.
Are there changes or additions to the minutes? Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The minutes are approved. We have 2 items on the agenda tonight for approval of gaming licenses at Bradford Lane Italian Foods LLC, doing business as Rosati's Pizza, and Minzu Zhao Incorporated, doing business as Kochi Sushi. Normally, these would be handled administratively, but I'd asked the council to, or I'd asked to bring this forward because I know there's some concerns on council, and I thought it deserved a full council input. So we'll take the first one first. Bradford Lane Italian Foods LLC, doing business as Rosati's Pizza of Normal. Motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Are there comments or concerns? Ms. Lawrence?
Question I had just prior to the meeting, and I'll raise it here just for clarification. On the room divider for the gaming area, you've got kind of 2 sides of that area that on the interior side of the restaurant. Will those both be sufficient to comply with the ordinance as far as screening and room dividing?
That's a staff question.
I'm sorry. That's okay. On the gaming area for Rosati's, the room divider on both sides of that interior, will that be full room dividers, or?
I'm going to defer to legal or clerk because I haven't, other than the plan that's in the packet, I don't know. So I would assume it's going to be code compliant if that's the full to the ceiling or just a divider, I don't know.
No, in fact, it would be partial room dividers, which would comply with the laws. All the laws is it has to be a separate area, and it has to be within view of an employee. So you don't want to completely block it off, or else
Okay.
you're blocking off
Got
the
it.
line of sight for the
Okay.
employees.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Further on the item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. A video gaming license is approved for Bradford Lane Italian Foods, doing business as Rosati's Pizza. The next one is Min Zhao Incorporated, doing business as Kochi Sushi, same issue. Motion for approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Is there discussion on this item? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. That license is also approved. That concludes our business on Liquor Commission tonight. A motion for adjournment, please.
So moved. Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Before we go into our regular meeting, we do have a presentation from the American Planning Association on a recent award we have, and I'm going to come down there. So we've got plenty of photo opportunity. You have a presentation? Oh, we have a presentation. Let's not do that just yet.
A presentation before the presentation.
Yes.
He'll switch it for you in the back.
Okay, I'll wait patiently.
Well, while we're waiting for that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Stephanie Brown, and I am an urban planner, but I am also the director of the Illinois State section of the Illinois chapter of the American Planning Association. Basically, Illinois State section is divided into 2 sections, the Chicago Metro and the Illinois State section, and that's the one that I help oversee. And I am here tonight on behalf of the entire board to present the Daniel Burnham Award for Outstanding Comprehensive Plan. The Daniel Burnham Award is named for America's most famous planner, Daniel Burnham. This award honors a comprehensive or general plan that advances the science and art of planning. This year, we proudly recognize the Town of Normal Comprehensive Plan 2040. I should say that there were many, many plans received, so it is very outstanding that you did receive this award. You ousted a lot of other comprehensive plans, so congratulations. Accepting the award in Springfield were from the Town of Normal, Mayor Chris Coos, Terry Legner, Mercy Davison, and Mark Peterson. And from the McLean County Regional Plan Commission, Visuna Gaharaju. The Town of Normal is well known for its embrace of smart growth principles in areas like Uptown. And the Normal Comprehensive Plan 2040 calls for complete, connected, and compact development throughout the entire community. Deviated from past approaches where land was divided by individual use, the plan is organized by a new framework of neighborhoods, centers, and corridors. Guiding the town's planning efforts are several key commitments and values laid out in the Town of Normal 2040 Vision Report. The report's overall vision statement is, we have a place for you in our vibrant, prosperous, and connected community. The 2040 plan utilized a new planning framework approach to land use by grouping Normal's geographies into 3 broad categories: neighborhoods, centers, and corridors. These are further broken down into smaller places, types that mix appropriate uses. This approach deviated from past plans where land was divided by individual use, such as low-density residential, commercial, etc. This new approach provides the town a more intuitive, flexible rubric by which to shape future development. This framework is further supported by a growth prioritization map that takes into account the availability of existing infrastructure and the plan's goals. Residents, businesses, and institutions were engaged early and on in the ongoing process through traditional and non-traditional means. The planning team also established a 25-person visioning committee, 7 additional advisory groups involving nearly 80 members of diverse backgrounds shaped the vision into 7 elements addressed in the plan: housing, health and sustainability, economic vitality, community identity and public places, humanitarian and social aspects, town and gown, and infrastructure and public safety. So on behalf of the APA, I congratulate you, the town, and all your staff on this award, and especially on this plan for the future of your community. Thank you.
Now we can go for a council picture.
Yeah, sorry. I'll give him a round of applause. Yes, Basu. Yep.
Not in there. We have to scoot together just a little more. That's good. Okay, everybody smile. 1, 2.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Call to order a meeting for the Normal Town Council for October 15th, 2018. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos?
Here.
Mr. Fritzen?
Here.
Mr. McBride?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do have a request for public comment tonight, 5 requests, and I will take those in the order in which we received those. I will remind people they have 3 minutes to speak in public comment. Council will not ask questions or respond, but I'm certain they will when we get to the meat of the issue that you're here to speak about. Our first speaker is Mike Kerber. I would ask if you're willing to state your name and address for the record.
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
I haven't done this before. You're going to have to coach me.
Yes,
You're doing
any-
great.
Any seat.
Anyone you want.
How long do I have?
3 minutes.
First of all, thanks for letting me speak with all of you. I live in Normal. Name is Mike Kerber. The Uptown is really a wonderful success. It's one reason I live in Normal. It's one reason I live close enough I can walk down there. And it's because of all the progressive planning and execution that forward-looking people like all of you, especially Mayor Coos, has done over the years. It's a great mix of old and new. The old storefronts give it a lot of charm. It's one reason a lot of people like it. Some of the new stuff has been good. Children's Museum, the Marriott, train station, and some of it hasn't been so good. And one of them is the Cosi building. You know, Cosi didn't last there. Sometimes new buildings are very expensive to rent. And I suspect that's one reason they didn't make it, or the bar that came after them. And the CVS building is ugly as sin. I don't even like to walk on the same side of the street as that thing's on. And I suppose one reason it makes it is because they can sell a lot of liquor to the students. And I'm here to ask you to save the two old buildings that are after going to come down for the new building. I hate to see us lose two charming uptown buildings. And the new buildings, like the one proposed and like some of the other ones, make uptown look like a strip mall. And I don't think that's what people really come down there for. And I think it would make the circle very uninviting. And I worked all my life in free enterprise. Sometimes I was involved in planning of buildings. And I know you can change buildings to make it fit what the city will let you have. And, you know, the citizens of Normal and you all are the ones that control what goes on down there. And I'd urge you to try and save those buildings and have the new building at the same time. Thank you.
Next up is Ron Ulmer.
Good evening. I'm Ron Ulmer, a citizen of the town of Normal. I have voiced, probably to most of your surprise, no public opposition to any development project in Normal prior to the project being completed, with the exception of the last building built on the circle that still has the first floor unoccupied, once I learned that the town of Normal would pay an exorbitant rent for the second floor almost in perpetuity. And then I only stated my opposition to friends and acquaintances, never publicly. I am concerned that much of the space will remain unoccupied. Currently, the most recent completed building's first floor, Mary Ann's, Bill's Lock and Key, Stout Chiropractic, remain unoccupied, leads me to question the demand for space in Uptown. Another concern, I fear the loss of the nearby parking spaces, surface parking spaces, that will result in fewer shoppers in Uptown. I asked some people at the Arc if the new library, when we were talking about building a library south of the tracks, with a nearby parking deck would meet the desire for close parking. They all said no. Many Central Illinois flatlanders do not like parking decks and refuse to park in them, especially senior citizens, many of whom like the shops and restaurants in Uptown. Finally, going along with the last person to address you, tearing down the older buildings reduces the charm and attraction of visitors to Uptown. Please recall the large number of people who expressed the desire to keep the historic buildings. However, they too will be torn down. I can only conclude that in Normal, by time proposals become public, the deal is done. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mark Tiratilli.
Mark Tiratilli, 1212 Timber Ridge Court here in Normal. Thank you for having me this evening. Good evening, everyone. Uptown looks great with the decorations. Thank you to town, staff, council for providing all that. I'm here to say that I'm in favor of development in Uptown, but not this particular project for a variety of reasons, namely the cost to the town, the lack of significant benefits, and the contradiction of our principles in doing this. First on the cost. The town is putting in about a third of this $30 million project. $8 million in TIF financing, $1.2 million in free land, free services, waived fees. A third of the cost is way too high for this. There's a list of a $4.2 million gap in the project. The developer just, we're going to fall that short. Well, that tells you that the project isn't viable and we shouldn't do it. We should either redesign it so it's scaled up or scaled down for economics, or just find a different project. But it's not the town's responsibility to close this gap. How are we going to do it? We're going to use TIF money, and you've heard me talk about this many times. This is the school district's money. We're going to divert money from the school district. Unit 5 is borrowing $16 million to cover their next 2 years of operating expenses. That number should be familiar to you because it is exactly the amount of money that has been diverted through the TIF district away from Unit 5 over these last 15 years. This process has to stop. Instead, we forced an extension upon them. They felt pressured. They said, you're going to go over our heads and do this without us, so we've got to go along with it. We're tired of having the school district's money taken. And on principle, it's even more insulting because you're guaranteeing $8 million in TIF payments to get $4.2 million in financing. We're taking the taxpayers' money that's been given in good faith to build our schools, and we're sending half of it into thin air as interest. We're not even getting anything for half of the money that we're diverting from the schools. To me, that is just appalling. The new market tax credit, which is the other means of financing, it's a very complicated mechanism, but it's a zero-sum game, and it was designed for blighted communities, truly blighted areas like Cairo, East St. Louis. It's worded loosely, and I know it could probably be shoehorned in here, but it's going against its principle. We have so much in this community, and we're going to take away opportunities from other communities. To me, that's completely wrong. There's got to be other vehicles for doing this. And some corporation then winds up with millions of dollars in tax credits for it. No, that's not the way to do that. We're not going to get a lot of benefit from this. Farnsworth is already here. The 300 people buying lunch are already buying that in this community. We're spending about $10 million to reshuffle economic activity that is already here. We're not creating additional jobs long-term. We're not manufacturing new products. We're not generating significant sales tax. It comes down to this. Uptown, great plan. It's been applauded. We should be preserving our history. That's in the plan. Let's not tear down the buildings. But after 15 years, after $250 million of investment, after diverting money from our schools and putting pressure on them, Uptown still can't attract a viable project unless we subsidize it. That's a huge problem. We need to find a different project. I'm all for building, I'm all for development, but not at this cost and not on this compromising of our principles. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Joel Studebaker.
Hello. I have to say, I've been at meetings before with both Mark and Ron, and an issue that unites the three of us is a unique issue indeed. This project has been in the works for some time now. I've spoken to at least a few of you about this issue and similar issues related to it. There's a lot that goes into this. We know that there are a number of people in this community who are upset at the loss of public art, upset at the loss of what they believe are historic buildings. For me, I'm upset that we're building yet another building using taxpayer money to subsidize a corporation that is not local to come in. We call it an investment, and we say that we're proud of that. We're proud that people are investing in our community. I'm not. Tartan Realty has been doing this for years. They've invested a lot of money here. They're going to get what they paid for. We gave them a lot of taxpayer money and free land to build a building on the circle. And now they're speculating with it. They will collect rents, high rents from it, from which we will receive a small, tiny fraction of their profits in the form of property taxes in perpetuity. Only after we finish paying them rents, we finish giving them what we agreed to make it happen. And at the end of the day, there will be thousands of dollars every month leaving in the form of rents from this community and going to Tartan Realty into Chicago. The same thing will happen at Core Life Eatery. The same thing will happen at the original Pancake House. The same thing will happen on Main Street Corridor. The same thing will happen now in Iowa with Bush Construction after we pay them and give them free common land to build something here. In a market that we haven't proved, because we built a building last year to prove this market and it hasn't yet. We haven't sold the ground floor, or leased it, sorry. We haven't leased all of the apartments on the upper floors. The only thing that is leased and secure is the 10-year lease that the town has for the second floor. That's not a proved market, and yet here we are debating whether or not we're going to tear down 2 buildings, take away parking that, let me tell you, everybody I've talked to has said is important to them, so that we can build a building that, as Mark indicated, is primarily going to serve people who are already here, so that for the next 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, Bush Construction can turn a profit, extracting thousands of dollars every month in rents, millions of dollars in rents, leaving our community, going to a developer from outside of our community. That's not sustainable. In addition, the only immediate economic development that comes from this agreement is 200 construction jobs, which are not in any way guaranteed to be local jobs because there's not a project labor agreement as part of this. There's nothing except for a single bullet point that says that the developer agrees to the extent that they can, use local labor. We shouldn't have agreed to extend the TIF without the guarantee of a project labor agreement, and yet here we are. No guarantee of local jobs, no guarantee that we're going to actually be able to lease all of this space or the space that we already have vacant in Uptown. The only guarantee is that one more developer is going to be able to speculate using land that we give them while we pay them for the privilege. I urge you to vote no.
And our last speaker tonight is Mike Batika.
Good evening, Mike Matika, 800 North School in Normal, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you tonight. I want to commend the council and staff as you've written this agreement with Bush Construction for the redevelopment around the circle to include prevailing wages and the use of local labor. And I also want to take this opportunity to also speak to Bush Construction and hope they will move forward in the same spirit that this council has put forward in your proposal to make sure that local people at good wages and fair wages get an opportunity to work on this project. You just received an award for comprehensive planning, for 20 plus years of planning. And I think what's commendable about this project is it's not just trying to preserve something that may not even be occupied today, but building something for the future, particularly as our transportation system changes. What's happening in Uptown Normal, around the station, around this building, around transit, is going to be something that in future years, people will come back and say, I'm glad we've got the space, I'm glad we've got a development that's vertical, so we can actually make use of transit and make use of a central area for economic development and for opportunity. So I commend you for your diligence with this project, and I encourage you to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment tonight. We'll go right into the omnibus agenda, items considered as routine in nature and will be taken by one vote. Unless the council member would like to pull an item for discussion, I would like to be excused on voting on any bills I may have submitted in the course of my duties. And motion for approval?
Move approval.
Second.
Items considered under the omnibus agenda tonight are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of October 1st, 2018, and approval of town of normal expenditures for payment as of October 10th, 2018. A resolution partially and conditionally approving the final development plan for the park at Constitution Trail Center. Resolution partially and conditionally approving the final plat for the park at Constitution Trail Center planned unit development. Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lawrence?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The omnibus agenda is approved. We move to general orders. We have, let's see, 5 items of general orders. The first 4 having to do with the Ameren Power Substation at 807 to 809 Pine Street.
Move approval. Second.
Thank you. I think we're going to hear from staff on this, and also from Ameren.
Yes, right. Mercy, I'm going to invite you to come forward too, but all 4 items are related, and they all have been presented to the Planning Commission. This pertains to an expansion of the Ameren substation on Pine Street. And as I look at the reports, they're maybe in a little bit different order, but in regards the site plan approval, rezoning, vacating, and site plan. So, subdivision, excuse me. So, Mercy, do you want to give some highlights?
Sure. So the substation at Pine Street's been there for quite a few years. As part of a major upgrade that Ameren's doing throughout the region, they're going to expand the size of the substation. So if you can picture it right now, the substation's on the east end of the property, and there's a bunch of trees to the west of it. So they'll expand west, they'll clear that site, which they already own. To do that, they need to re-subdivide all this land into one lot of record. They need to have it rezoned to something that's appropriate for a substation. And then they need a site plan approved. And in the middle of all that, they need some easements vacated. There's really not anything terribly interesting about expanding a substation. It's important to do. The only items of disagreement between the Planning Commission and the applicant pertains to the landscaping. There is an acknowledgement that they really can't keep a bunch of trees right next to the substation, but in cutting all those trees down and not planting anything back, it triggers a fee that is just part of the code that you pay for not planting the landscaping and not replacing significant trees. And the Ameren representatives will speak to why they would like to have that waived. The Planning Commission also asked that they at least plant some ornamental grasses along the Pine Street side of the property, where there will be a 7-foot tall chain link fence with barbed wire, which is standard for this sort of substation. But just maybe softening the appearance a little bit along Pine Street, where we do have a lot of people coming through. It's Route 66. And then an issue about the driveway. We always require that people hard surface driveways off of a public street up to the private property line, and they're asking that they only have to hard surface the first 4 feet and then leave the rest in gravel up to the property. So, that's just a code requirement, but they are asking that be waived. And nothing else about any of these other actions is an issue for anyone. The rezoning, the re-subdivision, the easement vacation, that's all fine, so.
And on behalf of Ameren, Mr. Nathan Briggs and Mr. Justin Goad have asked to speak to council and answer any questions you may have as well. So thank you.
Thank you for allowing us a few moments of opportunity to speak to you about our project. To begin with, I want to say to the town of Normal, thank you for your congeniality, for your courtesy extended to us in this project. Mercy Davison and Ryan Otto, the town clerk's office, have been all very helpful in guiding us through this process. Really appreciate the job that they do. Having spent the first half of my career in public service, working for taxpayers, working for state government, I can appreciate the job that public servants do, and they do a great job at what they do, and you all should be very proud of the job that they do for the town of Normal. So thank you so much for that. I want to speak to the 3 variances we have requested in regard to the site plan, and then Justin is the project manager, and he'll speak to some of the project itself. But we have asked, as Mercy has alluded to waive the requirement to plant all code required landscaping on site. The reason we have asked that is our project involves an electrical substation, and as you know, landscaping and substations just don't mix. The ornamental grasses that have been recommended by the Planning Commission still attracts wildlife. Wildlife within substations causes outages. And what we try to do as a company is limit outages for sure. So we have asked that that requirement would be waived. We have also asked for the fee in lieu of for the significant trees removed from the site also be waived. The lot that we have owned for quite a few number of years that lies next door that we will be clear cutting for this project. The trees on that lot, as evidenced at the Planning Commission, I believe it was Mercy who mentioned that they would probably be considered volunteer at best. And the buyout fee for this we deem to be excessive. It's in excess of $16,000. The trees are on that lot, as I said, would be considered volunteer. We would ask that you would consider waiving that requirement as well, because we feel as if the cost is excessive given the benefit of Ameren's project to the community. The last item that we have asked for a waiver for is the hard surface drive. As typical Ameren substation designs, we pay 4 feet of that entrance and the rest is gravel. The concern brought up the Planning Commission was the gravel put out on the roadway. Our entrances are not going to have a large average daily traffic count. There will be people in and out of that substation, but it's not a large amount of traffic that would, the possibility of putting gravel out there does exist, but I think it's limited due to the amount of traffic that would also exist with this. And also there are 2 entrances into this substation. One entrance does not have to comply with this requirement because it exists already. So we would have one entrance that would have a little bit of pavement and gravel, and then one that would be paved from the street right-of-way to the property line itself. Justin is the project manager for these projects. There are 3 actual projects within the town of Normal, improving substations and improving the reliability that Ameren provides its customers. So Justin, would you please speak briefly to those projects?
Sure. Thank you for your time. This substation is one of 3 major substations that I am in charge of for the Normal area. They're both 34 kV upgrades. So not only is it going to increase the expansion for future growth in this city, but it's also going to increase reliability. There's one here at Normal Route 66, Normal Main and Normal East. Our transmission group will be following with another multi-million-dollar project within a year shortly after, and then after these 3 are done, mainly this one we're here concerned about, of another project with about $10 million to also improve more of a powerhouse substation in the area. So I think all in all, in the next 3 to 5 years, Ameren's going to invest upwards of $20 to $30 million. We have a Brokaw substation and a Normal substation going on in construction right now, and I think those are in excess of $15 million. So when we budget these projects, when we do our site expansion, we take out any of the growth that is there. We rebuild, expand our substation. We don't like to have plants or any type of vegetation, just because if they get into the bus or into anything, we could have an outage, which could impact some of our customers and our users. So we're seeking this because it wasn't budgeted. We would rather keep some of that money to keep these upgrades and to keep moving. We're very particular about awarding contractors in the local area. And again, I think my 3 substations just for the 2019-2020 years are excess of $18.5 million. So.
Thank you. Questions for the 2 gentlemen from Ameren or Mercy? I will start with one of Mercy. Would you concur that the trees on the undeveloped lot are indeed scrub and volunteer?
I'd have to assume. I mean, they've been there a lot. I don't know that lot's ever been developed, so yeah, they're probably volunteers.
And I can't refer to the exact point in the ordinances, but there was some comment to the fact that there is no mechanism to waive those fees. Is that true?
Well, so significant trees are just based on the size and species, so the code doesn't distinguish between volunteers and not. So the trees that were deemed significant were looked at by the town's arborist. So we don't include things like ash trees, which are going to die, or silver maples, which fall apart really easily and don't live very long. So the trees we looked at were not those varieties. The code permits you to buy out of 25% of your required landscaping. Just anyone could do that, and they don't need to come get permission for it. If they decide they just want less landscaping, we put it into our fund and we put street trees elsewhere. There really isn't a mechanism to waive the whole fee. I mean, unless they just ask. I mean, it's just not like part of a normal process. Kind of like the driveway hard surfacing. That's not like a typical waiver someone would ask for, but they have. So they're asking for it. Yeah. So we typically, beyond the 25% buyout, that's not really an option in the code without some sort of variance.
I will say at hand, because of the nature of the property, I am supportive of waiving that the fee on the trees, because it's been undeveloped property. It really doesn't reflect on anything in the community. It's pretty much almost in an industrial zone. However, I'm not at all interested in waiving the hard surfacing or the screening on Pine Street. That's a very important corridor and getting more important because it's Route 66. I'm willing to ask staff to work with them, because if there is an issue of wildlife, I understand that in substations. Now, I'm sure you people have been accused 1,000 times of, oh, a squirrel, huh? And we know it happens. It does. So that's a very valid consideration. I think that's something that could be worked out. So in my opinion, I'm okay with waiving the planting, but not the hard surface and the screening. Anyone else? Ms. Lorenz.
I would echo that, and I appreciated what the Planning Commission, or how the Planning Commission weighed in on some of these issues. Particularly, I recall in the notes about the importance of that corridor and its historic Route 66 tourist attraction. So there was some discussion around alternative type of screening. So in lieu of actual plants that may cause some unintended consequences, can we look at something else that would soften the look? And I think that's really where the Planning Commission was going. Then the other thing is, having been a former planning commissioner, the ordinances are there for a reason, and so I'm not terribly inclined to just let them go. I appreciate, Mayor, what you've said, and I think we always do try to work things out, but at some point we are the kind of community we are because we have had strict rules about hard surfaces and signage and landscaping and so forth, and so we don't want to just throw that out. So I tend to agree with what you've said, Mayor. So I think something to maybe go back to the drawing board for.
Anyone else on this? Mr.
Are you ready for a motion?
Well, we're going to take a motion on the first item, but I think we need to have clear understanding because it's not in all the items. Pardon?
I was asking.
Yep.
Yeah, I think
Mr.
the first item is where we cover these issues,
Okay.
the waiver, the waivers requested.
Mr. Fritzen?
I guess I'd ask a question because you mentioned a couple of other substation locations. Do we have similar treatment issues in any of those other locations? I'm looking for some consistency maybe in how we address all of these.
Well, the one on the east side, I don't know that will require the removal of any trees. I think it's pretty much next to ground that's...
Justin has more familiarity with the other substations. This one in particular, we've owned this wooded lot since, I think, the early to mid-'70s, maybe the late '60s, somewhere in that time frame. And we, like Mercy said, we can only assume the trees are volunteer that are there, but Justin could speak if there's other tree issues at any of the others.
Our normal main substation is pre-existing, so we're expanding inside our fence, inside our property already. We looked to expand to purchase land, and that didn't. Both opportunities didn't come through. The normal east substation, we are expanding that near ISU, or excuse me, Illinois State University, I guess I should call it. and we own that land there, but we're building a retaining wall, so that's still in our property, and there's no trees or what in that area.
So just 3 different types of sites evidently.
They are, I mean, although on one of the sites it may be that, well, I don't know, there may be a requirement to plant landscaping. It depends on if you're subdividing. I guess we're not there yet. I guess I don't really know about these other sites.
Yeah. I tend to agree with the mayor in the treatment of this. One hesitation is with landscaping that I've talked about before. It always looks great when it goes in. A lot of times it doesn't look so great 3-5 years down the road. And it sounds like you're going to have a decent amount of traffic, not lots of traffic, but some regular traffic in and out of here. I would hope that if we land on that solution, that some of that traffic is somebody taking care of the landscaping.
Further on the item? Mr. Day, do we need an amendment, or can we just stipulate that we are taking a motion on ornamental grasses or screening going forward that would be acceptable to town staff and hard surfacing?
So what we do is, we can, just because this is only the proposed ordinance, we can make the modification if there's the understanding. Right now, the only waiver is the payment for the 25%, as long as they installed the ornamental grass. We just removed the requirement of any payment of the tree fees,
okay,
with the provision that they have to install the ornamental grass.
So we don't need an amendment?
And that we don't need any separate waiver for the hard surfacing, if that's not the council's intent.
Further discussion on the item?
So I'm not clear on what, on how it's being changed.
You're talking to a lawyer.
I know. Usually I understand them, so.
So the only change we'd make in the proposed ordinance would be to remove any fee requirement from the, so they can remove the trees
Number
under.
2.
It's on page 7-4, section 3. There's the variance.
Okay.
Are we clear?
And so that variance from section 15.14-7 would just remove the requirement to pay any fee for the tree removal, but keep in the requirement of the planting of the ornamental grasses.
Okay. Okay, I gotcha. I'm good.
I'd like to make a motion.
We have a motion.
What is the current motion?
We made we made a motion on the first item.
Prior to the amendment.
Motion.
But prior to the
I moved
No.
with the amendment.
That's just what we discussed. We don't need to reintroduce a motion, I don't think.
So we need to remove.
Who made the motion? As long as you're fine with the amendment, we can.
And who made the second?
Who made the second?
I think
Excuse me.
You're fine
I'm
with
fine
it?
with the amendment.
All right. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye. Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
No.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution approving the site plan is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance vacating an easement on the Marguerite subdivision to Normal, Lot 3, having to do with Ameren, 807 Pine Street. Motion for approval?
Move approval. Second.
Is there discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Number 9 is an ordinance rezoning properties in the town of Normal at 807 and 809 Pine Street. Motion for approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Discussion on this item. Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy? Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. That ordinance is approved, and the final one dealing with this property is a resolution approving the final plat for the Normal Route 66 subdivision, Ameren Substation, 807, 809 Pine Street.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Discussion on this item. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. And there we have it. Thank you for coming tonight. Item 11 is an ordinance authorizing a redevelopment agreement with Bush Development LLC for construction of a mixed-use building on the Trail East site in Uptown Normal.
Move approval.
Thank you. Before we go to council discussion, I think Pam has some comments to make.
Right, I'll give some of the background and explain a little bit of what staff is recommending. And then I'll also ask staff to get ready to jump in and clean up anything that I may miss or so. But just to give a little bit of background in terms of how we got to this point today, in December 2017, the town issued an RFP for proposals to develop the Trail East site. In January of 2018, council approved moving forward with Bush Construction as the developer on the Trail East project. Following that, we moved forward as an organization with proposing an extension of the TIF for the purpose of continuing development in Uptown and concluding our plan, because our plan for the Uptown renewal, as originally adopted in 2000, is not complete. And we wanted to set the stage for developers in the town to continue to finish up the Uptown plan and target the area north of the circle. During that May process, all of the taxing bodies supported the extension of the TIF. And so that allowed us to move forward. And basically, as a reminder, the success of the TIF is demonstrated by the amount of private investment in Uptown. Our Uptown renewal process is an ideal example of public-private partnerships. And to this point in Uptown, with our first project commencing in 2003, in 15 years, we have invested about $90 million or so in public funds in the entire Uptown area. That includes water, sewer, streets, infrastructure. It also includes property assembly for the future redevelopment. And so our investment has cultivated $140 million of private investment. So the benefit to the taxing bodies is in that future growth in that private investment. So our goal with extending the life of the TIF was to generate continued investment and finish our plan. The proposal tonight, I think, staff believes, fills the goals that we intended with Uptown renewal. We've intended with Uptown to create a vibrant and sustainable central business district that's an economic driver, and we certainly feel comfortable that this plan continues on that path. In addition, the Uptown 2.0 plan, which was adopted in 2015, identified the following strategies for office development, because we determined in the Uptown redevelopment, or the Uptown 2.0 plan, that office development was a priority. And it highlighted 5 strategies. One was tenant attraction, and it specifically suggests filling office space with non-anchor tenants and targeting professional services. It also talks about using mixed-use zoning for combination types of uses in a building. It talks about using financial incentives to facilitate office development, specifically tax increment financing. It talks about designation of public sites, meaning use publicly owned sites for development. And it talks about, the 5th item was parking allocation and a parking subsidy. The Trail East project as proposed tonight checks off all those boxes. From our perspective, we are proposing that the town convey the property that is currently municipally owned. We commit to providing access to 300 parking spaces at a discounted rate in Uptown. We also commit to undergrounding electric utility services in the alley and connecting those services to the Beaufort businesses. And then, of course, we also commit to waiving fees. All of these commitments that we're proposing in the redevelopment plan are things that we've seen before in our uptown renewal process. So when it comes time for discussion of the Tif support, I'm a little bit perplexed by some of the comments we heard tonight, specifically in regard to the school district and taxing bodies. The property today is tax exempt. The school districts don't benefit from tax exempt properties. They do benefit when it goes back onto private ownership and developed and the EAV grows. When the project is completed, we anticipate an EAV that will generate significant property tax. And what we're talking about is that in terms of this proposal, the difference, let me back up a little. Before the town acquired all the parcels in the Trail East project, they had an assessed value, an equalized assessed value. That's the baseline value. When we purchased those properties, when we acquired them, that baseline EAV dropped because we're a tax exempt owner. When those parcels go back into private ownership, the EAV goes up. So automatic increase. The town's we're not proposing that we write a check of $8 million today or even $4.2 million today. We are suggesting that this project be funded through the tax increment, not unlike other uptown projects that we've undergone. Basically, when the project is completed, the equalized assessed value will be looked at in comparison to what the baseline EAV was, and that increment increase will be rebated back to the developer. As the value of the project grows and the EAV grows, the developer gets that rebate back to a maximum of $8 million over the life of the TIF. What that means for the project today is that future value is put into present value dollars, equates to about $4.2 million. So the plan is that Bush can go to an investor, get $4.2 million, and that investor knows that the ultimate payoff down the road is $8 million over the life of the TIF.
Because of net present value.
Because of net present value, correct. So that's how the gap is filled. That gap calculation is how we have proceeded for the entire life of the Uptown TIF. And so we have found success in that process in the 15 years we've been doing that. And other comments that we've heard and received emails about is the status of 104 and 108 East Beaufort. We've attempted to address the concerns with the mural. Basically, the mural provides a sense of pride and an experiential kind of component to Uptown. And while I think many people understand that the mural can't be saved, even if 104 property, even if the building remained, because paint won't survive a tuck pointing process, it's our goal to recreate somehow that type of positive experience that people have when they are in front of the mural and taking photos. That will be our task, to make sure that somehow we recreate that experiential component, that sense of pride and placemaking. That's yet to be determined on how that will be created, but that will be something that will be our mission. In regard to 104 and 108, specifically 104, when we adopted the original Uptown Renewal Plan in 2000, the Uptown 2.0 plan in 2015, both of those plans incorporated the Trail East site from the Circle to College Avenue, and we believe the Trail East project that Bush will be developing meets that original plan. One thing that we spent a lot of time talking about when we adopted the original renewal plan back in 2000 was the expectation of the properties that front the Circle. And we spent a lot of time with Doug Farr talking about what the expectations are in terms of pedestrian friendly and arcade kind of feeling and such. So while all of the 3 developed sites right now, Children's Discovery Museum, Uptown Station, and one Uptown on the Circle, have different appearances, their presence on the Circle are similar in terms of pedestrian friendly and such. That's an expectation for both quadrants, the northeast and northwest quadrant of the Circle as well. The concern is if 104 was not raised, that area is very narrow in terms of putting a building there with the kind of frontage on the Circle that we've expected all along. I will defer any specific comments about costs and such if there are some for Bush, or if you want to talk further about what would that entail. The reality, though, is if 104 remains as municipal property and not part of the project, that means it remains tax exempt. And one alternative is to give 104 to Bush and not raise the property, not demolish, but then I'm not sure how that fits into Bush's book of business, because they will be building a commercial office building and a multi-purpose building, yet they'd have to invest dollars in 104 to make it habitable and find some tenant and such. That's the only way to get it back on the property tax rolls. So I'm not sure that's realistic. So that's kind of the status of 104. And then 108 has been incorporated as we put into our proposal, or our request for proposals way back in December, inclusion of 108. And it's the expectation that 108 will be raised to encompass a pedestrian walkway from the parking lot, which is adjacent to College Avenue, to Beaufort Street. So it allows accessibility and parking between the parking areas. So that's kind of the highlight. Staff is here to answer any questions, specific questions in regard to the proposal. But also at present, we have representatives from Bush Construction as well as Farnsworth Group. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with some comments here. First, I think there were some things that were set out of context tonight, and I think we need to bring clarity to those. The one is the extension of the Uptown TIF. It is not an extension of the Uptown TIF totally. It is an extension of the TIF monies on these 3 undeveloped properties. The balance of the Uptown TIF, which would be the Marriott, the Hyatt Place, all the buildings that have come before, 2026, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
2026, when that TIF expires, the school districts will get those dollars. So this is not a across-the-board TIF extension. This was a piece of the extension was carved out to cover these 3 properties, and I think that's a very important consideration. The notion that the city council has so much power that we forced an extension on Unit 5, I find that out of our range of power. We did not do that. Unit 5 understood what we were trying to do as a community and voted for that. As I recall, it was unanimous vote, wasn't it? That's true. I'm going to talk about historic preservation here a little bit, because prior to being on council, I was a historic preservation chair for 10 years. I had the opportunity to work in the Uptown area as a historic preservation chair, and we did have plans for Uptown in the 90s on that. I was not a council member when the initial FAR plan, FAR and Associates, was chosen out of 5 plans, and one of the plans was do we keep the historic in total? Do we redesign Uptown Normal in the fabric of historic preservation? We acknowledged at that time when we talked with FAR and Associates that we would keep what we could in historic preservation, significant buildings, that new buildings would mirror or honor the architecture of the older buildings whenever possible. In the 90s, we tried to create a historic district for Uptown Normal. And the pushback that we got on it was it would be a nice idea. Some of the business owners wanted to do that, most did not. Most of the business owners did not own their properties, and almost to a person, no property owner had any interest in historic preservation in Uptown Normal. So we walked away from that plan. As we adopted the FAR plan and started moving through it, I think it's important to note that there were millions of dollars spent in the process of Uptown Normal, saving and rehabbing historic buildings. So let's go down the list. 209 North Street, the Normal Theater. 207 North Street, Jimmy John's. 205 North Street, Coffee Hound. All received grants for facade restoration to as close to original as possible, and to do some life safety issues. 203 and 201 North Street, The Rock. 121 North Street, Campus Town Supply. Again, an attempt to restore the facade of that building. 119 North Street, Victor's Alterations, a restoration of the front of that building to what it looked like in the 1800s. 122 and 120 North Street, the Medici. While that was a single-story building, we assisted with Medici in development, and they, to a fault, rebuilt that building using the facade of the original two buildings that were there. 115 North Street, Graham's Comics. 113 Waiting Room Records. 111 Stave, all part of an old bank building, which we did. We financed significant work on restoring the facade on that building. 116 North Street, Sugar Mamas. 114 North Street, Uptown Gifts. Again, grant money to restore the facades of those buildings. 112 North Street, Beyond Normal Gifts. 106 North Street, GP Popcorn, Garlic Press Popcorn and Sweet Shop. 107A, East Beaufort, EMAC and Bolio's. This was an interesting project because they went in and stabilized that building. And when it was time to come in Tuck Point and restore the facade of that building, some of you will recall, the facade fell off of it. And that's not uncommon in historic preservation. That does happen. But to the credit of the owner of that building, he restored that facade to the original look. 107 C East Beaufort Street, Firehouse. 117 East Beaufort, Insomnia Cookies. 119 East Beaufort, Babbitt's Books. 121 East Beaufort, DP Doe. 126 East Beaufort, Maggie Miley's. All of these buildings received significant dollars to restore their facades and preserve the historic character of those buildings. That's 22 buildings in Uptown Normal that we have invested in saving the historic assets of those buildings. We've lost some buildings. There was a building that we lost that was hard on the community, but the owners of that building put such a high price and restrictions on the use of the building that we weren't able to do anything with it. Another one had significant ADA issues, and no developer could figure out how to economically restore that building because of the ADA issues. So the town of Normal does take very seriously its historic assets in this community. And we will continue to do that. We won 3 awards from Landmarks Preservation Council of Illinois for the work we've done in this community, and we'll continue to do that kind of work. So I'm going to turn it over to some other council members to talk at this point, but this is an issue that's very passionate for me, and I think I needed to address that. Mr. Fritzen.
At the risk of repeating some of what you said, I'm going to repeat some of what you said. I do appreciate, we got several emails, and somebody asked me this afternoon, about some of the joys and things you might miss about not being on the council in the future, and one of those things was the opportunity to interact with people and to try to help soothe people at times, other times advocate for them and whatever. But one of the great things about Normal is we have an engaged citizenry for the most part compared to most communities. So that's one of the things that makes serving the town of Normal fun and exciting and challenging is that you have people that are engaged. So I do appreciate that. But from the sounds of some of those emails, one would think that we went down North Street and Beaufort Street and stripped everything out. And you just gave, I mean, those are handwritten notes, folks. That's not some report that was prepared for the mayor. Those are handwritten notes, and we didn't do that. And through the facade grants, applying some of that debt to existing buildings, we encouraged people to refurbish and restore. You know, the campus town was Randall's Five and Dime, you know, for me growing up, and so to see that stripped off the front and restored to a more original thing was you know, one of the great accomplishments uptown. So I'm puzzled too by some of the and maybe the folks just weren't here and don't understand just what we did save here. My understanding is on 104 and 108, I'm not sure those properties can be refurbished from some of the reports we've had on some of those properties. And I know the property that was the pod, when we went in there, we discovered that you know, we had somebody living on the second floor when the second floor wasn't licensed to be inhabited. So you know, there have been things going on in those properties that aren't visible to the you know, casual observer going up and down the street, but there are things there that you know, probably would prevent those properties from being restored to a great deal anyway. Some references earlier, the leased space in One Uptown Circle, that lease was not a gift. That lease was for space that the town needed. Our engineering and inspections people are housed there, and our engineering folks in particular, for decades, were in less, you know, substandard office settings. So that fulfilled a need. Yes, it helped the developer, but that was a two-way benefit there. And so we can argue about the price if you'd like, but nevertheless, it wasn't just a gift to the developer for us to lease that space. It fulfilled a town need. There are no local developers doing projects of this scope.
That's right.
You know, that's the facts. You know, sure, the profits and the money are going to go into the coffers of an out-of-town developer, but there are no local developers doing this type of project. We do have a timeline to try to complete the vision of Uptown within a certain, you know, within the life of the TIF, if at all possible. We don't, you know, we're not going to turn into a pumpkin if it doesn't get done by then. But you know, the tools that are available to help are in place, and you know, the plan has been being worked. You know, started longer than 15 years ago, but it's been worked for 15 years now. The purpose was stated all along that these blocks of property around the circle were going to develop in this type of nature. You know, some kind of office, retail, residential mix. And so this deal is in keeping with that plan. There was a remark that said, you know, when the proposals become public, the deal is done. Well, the deal fits the plan. You know, I'm sorry, but it does. And so it's taken months, as Ms. Reese talked about earlier, to complete the deal and to put all the pieces and parts together. But, you know, these are complicated things. And as much as you'd like to share all the details from, you know, day one, that's just not practical. And so once you arrive at that deal, and this is something that we were going to try to have on our agenda a month ago or 2 weeks ago, and you know, whatever, and finally we have it on our agenda here tonight. So if we keep delaying something that actually fits with the plan that's been in place for the last 20 years, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. On the TIF, I represented the town in front of several of our taxing bodies. And let's be clear. Our local representatives in Springfield told us, you need to get buy-in from all of your taxing bodies. They were not willing to take it to Springfield without the buy-in from everybody. So there was going to be no going over anybody's head, okay? That is flatly not true. Nobody was trying to go over anybody's head. Nobody was putting pressure on Unit 5 to sign on or else, okay? That is not true. Absolutely not true. We were operating in good faith with all of our taxing bodies, as we always have on TIFs. As the mayor mentioned earlier, we even carved out part of the Uptown TIF and said, we only want the extension on these properties that are yet to be developed. We are not asking to include and extend the entire TIF district. We actually want that money to be released when it was planned to be released. So we asked for an extension on carved out properties that are yet to be developed. Many of which, most of which, the town invested in earlier so we could control the development going forward on those properties, which means they aren't currently producing any property tax revenue for any of these other taxing bodies anyway. So let's make that perfectly clear, please. There was no pressure on Unit 5, and in fact, quite the opposite. The pressure was on us to present a compelling case so that our local representatives felt free to go to Springfield and say, we support this TIF extension for the town of Normal. The county board at committee and as a whole was not unanimous. So there was pushback on us, okay, not pressure on other people. So let's make that clear. I think this project is one that's been months in the making. There's been some fits and starts to it along the way, but Bush has stuck with it. Farnsworth has stuck with it. Yes, Farnsworth's employees are already in the community, but they're in multiple locations. They want to consolidate in one spot. They want to be in Uptown Normal. They already have a presence in Uptown Normal. Yes, they do. But they're going to bring dozens and dozens and dozens of employees to one location. They're going to be a more efficient operation, and they're going to be located and doing business in their break time, at their lunch time, before work, after work, whatever. They're going to be part of that environment in Uptown that so many people tell us, you know, this has been a great job. This has been a great job. It hasn't been just smooth sailing from the start. I was part of not making it smooth sailing from the start, you know? And so, but it has developed the way it has developed, and I think the mix is amazing. Just when you tomorrow, drive down North Street, come back on Beaufort Street, whatever, and look at how the old and the new mixes well together. The other thing that we're told by the university, and they are in a challenging time, just like the rest of us operating in the state of Illinois, but they're trying to attract faculty to this campus, and they're trying to attract students to this campus, and they're in a highly competitive environment for that. Uptown Normal is a big selling point for them, and that's what we've achieved together over these last 20 years. And so, this development, just like I said, it's part of the plan. It fits the plan, and it's what we've desired to do. And these folks have brought this plan and kind of stuck to it because it hasn't been easy. But I see no reason not to proceed because it meets our needs and follows our vision.
Mr. McBride, and then Ms. Cummings.
So there's a lot, and I will also try not to repeat too much of what my colleagues have said here tonight. I would like to, for a second, talk Unit 5, and maybe this is something that just needs to be said on the record. As many of you know, I am a proud Unit 5 parent, still with 3 kids, although one will graduate this year, which is a little hard to believe in and of itself, but 3 students in Unit 5, and I think Unit 5 does great work. And they, in many ways, have been dealt a tough hand by the state, by a referendum effort that failed several years ago, and by a host of other issues. But I think Unit 5 does great work, and I consider this body a partner of Unit 5, and I think I've been pretty vocal about the importance of that. There are many things that separate Bloomington Normal from the typical struggling Midwestern community that Rust Belt, whatever term you want to attach to that. We're not one of those communities. Part of it has been fortune. Part of it is location, transportation, infrastructure, and large employers, higher education. But another big part of it is the strength of our 2 public school districts. So I consider Unit 5, and for that matter, District 87, although they're in Bloomington, not a normal, a huge part of this community's continued success going forward. And I know everybody up here feels the same way, that strong public schools are a priority. So I, too, get a little upset when people suggest that we're somehow deliberately coercing someone or diverting funds away from public schools. It's not the way this has worked at all. I also, although I won't go into the exhaustive detail that you did, Mayor, about historic preservation, but the town does have a pretty outstanding track record. Not perfect, never perfect, and there were many instances where some things, as you alluded to, just simply could not be saved. But we have an outstanding record on historic preservation, and incidentally, not just in Uptown. And it's interesting to me when some people who have in the past been very vocal and outspoken against investments in historic preservation have suddenly, on this project, suddenly they're all for historic preservation, and in some cases, feigning outrage. Couple of other things I'd like to mention. As far as the mural is concerned, I think one takeaway from this entire process has been maybe we're taking public art for granted and maybe we haven't prioritized it enough. And I think that's something we can change, and that's something that probably won't cost a lot of money. And I think we will prioritize that moving forward. I'd like to see more of it. If we can recreate what we have there, great. Maybe it's something new. Maybe it's some things new that will create ample opportunities for selfies down the road. That's something I'd like to see, and I think we can do that. Placemaking is important, and those who were here from the beginning of the process should be, I think, very proud of the fact that Uptown is a place where people want to be and they want to capture their memories. That's very meaningful. I'd also heard from a couple of folks who are concerned about surface parking, particularly about some of the ADA accessible parking in the short term during construction. That is important. I also think that's something that we can work on and get people through. So, but I appreciate folks bringing their perspective and point of view to that. 200 construction jobs at prevailing wage. That's economic impact. 300 folks who are down here in Uptown, as was said earlier, working from 8 to 5 and spending their lunches and shopping afterwards. That is an economic impact. So I am proud and I am excited that someone wants to come to this community and invest. I appreciate the gentleman who spoke earlier. It would be nice if there was a local developer who was doing this sort of thing. It'd be nice if we were able to locally source a lot of things, but the fact is most of what we consume is made somewhere else. And if you are one of the few who have made a commitment to sourcing as much as possible that you consume locally, I'm impressed and good for you, but that's not easily done. So I think this is very exciting, and I would encourage everyone to take the long view on this. And it is a very long view. It's been since 2000, since the plan was in place to get this building done. One last comment, and then I'll be quiet, I promise. I've heard One Uptown mentioned a few times, and yes, it is frustrating to see the restaurant space vacant. And I'm not sure at this point, and perhaps we can leverage the fact that we have invested in lease space in that building to get something in there. That is frustrating, and I think we all recognize that. Thank you.
Ms. Cummings, if you'll hold for just 1 second, I want to reflect on two things that Mr. McBride said. I'll be very brief on this. The loss of public art is an issue, and I will tell you I've had 2 meetings with the director of the School of Art at Illinois State University and a meeting with the Dean of Fine Arts at the school, Illinois State University to talk about expanded public art. And this is not a tit-for-tat replacement. This is about bringing more public art throughout Uptown Normal. So it's not something that's dropped off of the radar. And I think it's important to point out, too, that the businesses, the office users that have committed letters of intent to Uptown Normal, you mentioned that they're consolidating some of their efforts, but both have told me it is crucial to their recruiting process. The quality architects and engineers, young people that are interviewing with Farnsworth, I know, are concerned about the locations of the current buildings and don't find them very attractive and not enticing. And I have been told that the notion of a vibrant district like Uptown Normal is a recruiting thing for the businesses as well. And so I won't belabor that. Ms. Cummings.
I'm going to try not to do any repeats from some of the things that were said. First of all, I do want to thank everyone who spoke tonight. I want to thank everyone who submitted emails or communications to us expressing your concerns, and really want you to know that they were read thoughtfully and with consideration. I first want to address, because I'm going to go through my notes here. I first want to address that I was one of the people who asked as many ways as possible how to save the art, because I am a big proponent of art, just growing up in a very artsy family. So I understand all of that. And I grew up in the era of graffiti, and it was something, you know, it was a big thing. So I get it. When we talked about how do you move it, and even moving the brick, and, you know, me even doing some additional research on my own, it is very difficult to do that and could be very, very costly. I think in the future, too, if we decide to do something like that, another mural, I think, too, the best thing to do is to do the research on the building that you're doing it on. And that was evident in my research on that. You should know the structure and the construction of that building, especially if it's something that you want to last. Apparently, with the type of building that was not probably the best ideal of placement. It looked to be the best place because of where it's set. I get that. But from a construction standpoint, it was not the best choice of place. And I don't know who made that decision or how that came about. But it was a beautiful piece, and it's so sad that the type of building that they put it on, it cannot be removed and saved. So just for the future, as we do move forward, we want to think of things like that, not just because here's an open space and this will be some place where everybody can see it, but also think about the construction of that piece of space that you're looking to beautify, so that it is lasting and will withstand, years to come. The mayor already touched a lot on the historical piece, and I don't want to belabor that. One thing that I do want to touch on that both RC and my counterpart, Jeff, has talked about, but I'm going to take it from a different standpoint. I serve on the National League of Cities Federal Advocacy Committee for Community and Economic Development. And I think it's kind of sad that I can go there and we get praised for our work. I can open up the Illinois Municipal League magazine and read a beautiful article about the work we do, but it seems so unappreciated from those who live here, and we get so admired from other places. I think that to understand, too, where we are, I know we talk about in the Federal Advocacy Committee, how do you change the landscape of development? Because we all are facing the same things. Everybody's talking about public-private partnerships. What do they look like in the coming future? There are some locations or some cities, even smaller than us, to me, who have bad incentive plans where they do tax-free for 5 years, or there's a lot of different things that have been shared within that committee that is mind-blowing. And to me, things that we as a council would have never approved, because we try to make smart choices on the type of developments and what we're trying to do and bring here. TIFs is not something that Normal just does and abuse either. And we certainly don't bully our friends to have our way with those either. So I think some of that is kind of disheartening, to go from a national stage and be recognized, and people want to hear what we're doing and want to know. You know, the minute, usually when I first started and people ask me, where are you from? I say, oh, I'm from this small town in Illinois. And they say, no, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Normal. And they bring up Uptown and they bring up the Amtrak station. And we're talking about people who are in places like California, Hollywood, California, Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, because we're one of those places that they look at when they want to learn more about development and how do you do it better. And so we're not doing anything that is damaging to our community. That's no different than what other people are doing or taking a look at. One thing that I love about this council and I brag about is how we come together to make smarter choices so that we're not in a position how some cities have tried to do these things and are now suffering greatly. Yes, we have debt. I wish I could say as an individual I didn't. I have a student loan, I've got a car note, I've got credit cards, I've got a mortgage, I've got a personal loan. Yes, I'm putting my business out there because I want you to know, as an individual, I have debt, but I'm not operating in a deficit. And it's made, some of those things have made me a better person. If I didn't have a student loan, I wouldn't have the degree I hold today. So sometimes we have to make those types of choices. Some things we do that are sometimes are not wise individually, but I know as a town we've tried to make the best choices as possible. I love this community. I brag on it quite often. And when I go other places, especially other communities, college communities in particular, I do compare. And I always say, you know, I think we're still better. We're still better. And I think that at some point, especially as our Amtrak and transportation expand, this will certainly be your day destination kind of place to go, hang out, shop, eat, walk about. And I can see that for our future. But you have to be able to have that vision too and not just see today. If many people only saw today, it would be a scary place for us to live right now. It took visionaries, and I applaud my council members for being that.
Mr. McCarthy and then Ms. Lorenz.
We can go down the road if you want.
Mr. McCarthy.
Take the right side. I'm going to avoid most of what my counterparts have already spoken about or emphasized, other than a couple of key things that I was contacted about directly. I guess first of all, I want to echo a statement by Mr. Fritzen thanking everybody to be here. This can tend to sometimes by outsiders appear to be hostile and adversarial when if you want an engaged community, part of what you want is people that are passionate coming in front of you and speaking. And so thank you. However this comes down tonight, on the side that you're here to support or the side that you're not, we appreciate you being here and expressing your viewpoints with us, me personally. I guess I want to start off by sharing a story. I want to thank both Mr. Fritzen and Mayor Coos for sharing the history. I was not here for a lot of that. I came to this community in the mid to late 90s when the visits were happening and the plan was starting to be formulated, and I got to hear some of that as that was going on. And I tried to visit some of the businesses when the street was 10 feet down and sewers and everything were being replaced, and thought, holy cow, what are they doing to this place? And it's been amazing transformation, but I guess I'll call this person a townie, reached out, who grew up in at that point, they made a point to say downtown Normal. Their family, their parents and grandparents, all from here, watched the transformation of Uptown. Business owners for many, many years, different businesses that the family has owned, retail, service, a few different types here in town. And wanted to remind us of a couple things as we consider this decision. Also, old building owners as well. That a couple of things is that first, sometimes you do have to start over in some spaces. This person reminded me of buildings that were in place in Uptown from the 50s and 40s and 30s that she was recently reminded of in some pictures, and really how bad it was in downtown Normal well before this whole process started, and that some of the buildings we're talking about now, what was there before, was not very nice, and that was torn down to make room for some of the stuff that's now here in those places. The second part was wanted to remind us that many of the murals that are in downtown Bloomington have been painted over 3, 4, 5, and 6 times because the murals have faded, cracked, deteriorated, and that all old buildings need maintenance and care and are rather costly. And this person wanted to remind us that that for business owners like them, when they make those decisions, they're hard decisions to make, but without extreme efforts and significant costs, generally they get painted over, or if you're going to put art on the outside of the building to Miss Cummings, you've got to protect it to the point of really impracticality to be able to put artwork on the outside of a building. And so it was interesting from a local business owner who's been grown here, or their family here, several generations, principally around the downtown Normal area, and business owners, to remind us of that history. A couple of points I do want to touch on. I want to lend my voice in support for public art. I agree that this has shown us that our community cares about it, and I know Ms. Reese and Ms. Cummings, we had a brief conversation in a recent meeting of maybe one of the opportunities immediately out of the gate is if there is to be a pedestrian crosswalk or pass-through, maybe that's the place we can immediately start, is to be able to engage some of our local art community or business owners, whatever that public process is, but to get that process going right away and show that we really do mean it, that we care about it. A couple specific things that people have reached out, either email, phone calls, personal conversations. We are not extending the entire TIF. I want to underline that. I know the mayor made that. But to be clear, at the end of the original TIF, the vast, vast, vast majority of the development will be back on the tax rolls. 2, I believe, Ms. Reese, you mentioned this, but when public property transfers hands, property tax begins accruing right away. I heard you correctly.
That is correct.
So, Trail East, property transfers hands, property tax starts accruing immediately.
Right, the equalized assessed value, it goes up.
So to be clear, 0 property tax is being generated on the property now. It will start generating property tax immediately for the school district. So this is not diverting, it's actually generating. I want to be on the record publicly clear that anybody who tells you that is misleading you, that that's not the case. Third, and I'm not sure how this came about, but or where this really came from, but the town is not incurring any additional debt for this project. 2/3, 3/4 of the people reaching out to me have been concerned about us expanding our debt. We are not expanding our debt in any way. Fourth, back in 2015, and review of the plans and looking to Uptown 2.0, one of the largest significant needs that we identified and the community identified is that we don't have enough office space, or really much office space at all in Uptown Normal, and that was in demand by the business community. So it makes sense that we're attempting to do that. And I guess fifth, some of the comments were a little perplexing to me personally, that there's no new business or no new business opportunities out of this project, and I was really kind of surprised by that. Frankly, a proposed food hall is a brand new business to this community. It doesn't exist currently. We've got some entrepreneurs that are looking to plop down money and take a risk in a space that we're creating, but for the space we're creating or helping to create, we're not actually creating it, helping to create, that business may not exist. We're creating a space. And food, I understand, although I don't really know what the project is, so, because we don't really know what the project is, or I don't know anyway, but may involve some sourcing from our local agricultural industry, our local farmers, frankly. So a startup business helping other businesses in our community is new. And if, I know there's some talk of potential incubator, again, I don't know what that is, but an incubator is about generating new business. I'm perplexed why we're talking about not new opportunity. And if there's additional space in this building, the ability of key tenants to attract new space, what is that? It could be a new business coming to town. It could be more entrepreneurs. We don't know. The proximity to the Illinois State University, we know, is important to a lot of entrepreneurs, because frankly, a lot of it is students have great ideas that are trying to find space and place and funding to get their businesses rolling. That was a little bit. And I guess I know parking has been talked about a lot, although we didn't talk about options a whole lot about what our plans are. I know there's some talk about the Parkinson lot being used transitionally, and the east side of the trail near the water department. Can you talk to us a little bit about thoughts on that?
That is correct. Staff is looking at our obligations with development, past development agreements and the proposed development agreements to make sure that we are not overcommitting in terms of parking spaces, and then creating a plan for when parking needs exist. And so the proposed Trail East development, we are committing access to 200 spaces in the College Avenue deck. One possibility is, if needed, we can relocate long-term Amtrak parkers, which right now are allowed to park on the top level of the deck. We might divert those over to the Parkinson lot. And so that's one possibility. We also have a parking lot which is on the west edge of the water treatment plant next to Constitution Boulevard. If needed, we could probably work out some sort of arrangement for that to be public parking. Typically, that space is used for construction vehicles during construction activity, but we do have some possibilities in terms of providing some access to parking down the road.
Thank you. I'm glad, and I assumed that we were, and I know we're going to do a parking study in Uptown.
Well,
separately.
Staff is reviewing all of our parking obligations
Okay.
and taking a look at the available parking. So
Okay.
that's more of an internal issue.
Right. I didn't know the extent, but I know when these things come up, obviously, we tend to try to plan ahead, and I think that's important, and I think some of the concerns raised about parking are important, that we keep that in mind. I had the opportunity to be the council liaison to the 2040 plan. This building, the development, the potential tenants that at least I know about at this point, and the potential opportunities are very much in line with what I heard in the planning rooms. And so you heard the award for it, somewhere around 80 or so community members got together and put in a bunch of time to tell us what they imagined the future of our community to be. And frankly, this lines up very, very well with that. And so if it was that reason alone, I would get behind it, because that's what the citizen input told us. But I think the economic development opportunities, the new business development, the fact that we're really not committing any dollars other than what the project is going to generate itself. I think it's a good investment for the community.
Ms. Lorenz and then Mr. Preston.
Okay. All right, thank you. We're getting to the end here, and I've been checking off some things as people have already brought it up, so I'm glad you brought up the debt part, Mr. McCarthy. I want to kind of go down the notes that I took in order of the speakers who spoke to us at the top of the meeting. I think there's a couple of issues here worth tracking as we would move forward on this project, assuming it gets, the redevelopment goes through tonight. And that would be the design of the building and parking. And parking is going to be one of those just perennial issues as we talk about a condensed area of a business district and in a university community. I mean, any college town, any university always has some sort of parking. So parking is always going to be an issue. We're going to always have to manage it. Glad to hear about, ongoing staff review of utilization and what's been promised and so forth. So I see we do have a couple of uptown business owners in the back there, and I know parking is of a concern to your patrons, and we take that seriously and will not forget that. As far as the design goes, and I don't know if the speaker is still here who raised that issue, I think there is a process in place through Uptown Review Commission and perhaps even Historic Commission, maybe even Planning Commission, where those are venues that are designed for public discussion and input. And so should this redevelopment decision tonight go forward with the positive, then the next phase of the design will happen. And for those that have some real contributions to want to make about, comparing it maybe to some of the buildings that they don't feel are very aesthetically pleasing, let your voice be heard in those venues would be my advice, because that will just make the whole project better. And whatever does get designed by the architects and ultimately would come here would be better off because of the input that you gave at those commission hearings. So parking and design are two areas that I think are definitely worth managing going forward. On the office space, clearly it's been something that was identified in the studies that we had done. And as my son always tells me, Mom, skate to where the puck is going to be. I think that's what he says to me. In other words, always be looking forward. I think this is maybe one of those moments where we're skating to where the puck is going to be. And that, here's an organization in Farnsworth and maybe another tenant or two who have expressed some sincere interest that are wanting to locate all together in a setting that looks to be appealing for their future recruits, and this is where they want to be. And so rather than looking at this as, are we reacting to a deficit or the fact that there aren't any office space, the reality is that we're wanting to be more proactive and skate to where the puck is going to be, which is more and more organizations like a Farnsworth who want to recruit that next generation of professionals are looking to see what is important in that workforce. And so they're wanting to make an investment to that end. So I see this as a positive that the previous councils here started something that now we're building upon that is desirable to that next generation of workforce. And let's face it, the interesting synergy in a business district like Uptown is when you have the retail, the employment, the industry, and residential all happening. And that's what we're really trying to be, and I think that's really what the plan set out to be. So, we've got some vibrant stores. We've got lovely boutiques. We're beginning to bring in the residential. And then that third leg of the stool is the office space. So, by contrast, we're seeing a different direction in downtown Bloomington, where longtime employers have pulled out of that district, and some of the small business owners there are really feeling it in terms of their lunchtime crowd or their shopping crowd. So maybe like to what Ms. Cummings said, you know, let's be excited about this. Let's be excited about the future that this shows, especially in light of the fact that some of our major employers are going through major changes. This is an opportunity for us to really diversify and be more, I don't know, proactive or forward-thinking in our employment base. So I'm pretty excited about the office space question, to be honest. And then I guess a couple other points to make here. This is probably more to the developer. Mr. Matika's point, the final speaker point about local workers is very important, and we take that very seriously. So to hire the local trades and labor to work on this project. And somebody else brought up the project labor agreements and so forth. You know, let's see if we can't do this in a way that's right for the community and put to work our local workers. Because we all know, and it escapes me now, but you know, when you pay $1 in wage, you know, that turns into, is it 5 or 6 times that it's spent over in the economy? So let's put those local workers to work and build this building. So I'm glad he raised that point. The final piece, though, is on the cost. And I just don't want this to get caught up in any kind of, you know, you can beat the numbers to say what you want. And one of our speakers said 1/3 of the cost of the project is is being borne by the town. I, in my opinion, feel like that's an exaggeration of the real dollars. I look at 25 out of the 29 million as being put up by the developer. That's 85, 86%. We are contributing through the tool of a TIF. And cities all across this country use TIFs. And this is a very reasonable way to use it. And I think to characterize that we are putting upwards of $10 million when you do the $8 million in the TIF, $1.2 million in the value of the buildings, and then, you know, and some change for some other of the fees and so forth. You know, I look at that $1.2 million for the building, and it's basically, you know, what's it worth to me if it's just sitting there with no buyer? Nothing, you know? And I think we've already touched on the fact that the property value is nothing. So, you know, if somebody comes along and says, hey, I'm interested, I got to look real hard and say, it's not doing anything for me right now. It's not even earning anything on property tax rolls. So you come along as an interested buyer and potentially bring some real economic development to this district, I think we have to listen. So I think that the more realistic is that we are contributing through the TIF financing tool the equivalent of $4 million to this overall financial package of a $29 or $30 million project. And then I'll just finish with a story, and that is to this point of placemaking. True story. Don't know the young lady's name, but she's a student here at ISU. When we had our Town and Gown Meet event a couple of weeks ago, where we met with some of the students, many of them Student Government Association, but a lot of them were regular students. And we had really nice conversation. And one gal said, you know, she was a freshman. She and a couple of her friends were all there, freshmen. I said, well, what brought you here? She said, well, really, I was going to go to U of I. She said, I thought I was going to go to U of I in Champaign. She was from the Chicago suburbs. But she said, I also decided to come visit Illinois State. And she said, as soon as I got here, I just felt like this whole community was home. As I walked around uptown, this just felt like home. And I should have gotten her name. I should have recorded her, because that's exactly what we are hoping to do. And that relation between what's happening between the town and Illinois State is really, really exciting. We love having them here because they come here and they bring their families here and maybe even end up, you know, staying here and spending part of their career here and working uptown. And you know, it's just a real good symbiotic relationship that, to me, proved once again some of the heavy lifting that previous councils did to get this ball rolling really is paying off in terms of the increased enrollment and higher profile of Illinois State University. So any ISU students in the crowd, welcome, and we are glad to have you. So I'll leave on that note. I do think this is really a positive step for us.
Mr. Preston.
Thanks, Mayor. One of the unfortunate things when issues like this one tonight come up to the table about being the last council member to speak is that there really isn't a whole lot new that can be said, and that all of my points that I have and all my thoughts on this
Thank you for recognizing
have been
that.
taken. Yeah. It. A couple points, though, I do want to highlight or re-highlight. First of all, thank you to the 5 individuals who spoke tonight. Thank you for your passion and your interest in your local government. Thank you for being involved in what's going on in your town and in your community. I mean, I think that, that's how a lot of us up here got started, was just taking an interest in what's going on around us and taking an interest in our community and taking an interest in our local government. So thank you for coming and for speaking and for putting yourself out there and putting your ideas out there. First of all, on the public art on the mural, obviously has been stated and stated over. The mural is not something that whether 104 comes down or whether 104 stays, the mural is not something that feasibly can be salvaged. If that building stays standing, it would require some extensive tuck pointing along that facade, which would render the mural, unsalvageable and not, not fully intact, certainly as it is today. That was an important piece to me, because the last time we had a big discussion about this at the council table, that seemed to be a source of primary interest for a lot of these speakers, at least a lot of emails and the calls that I received around that time. So many of them focused on the mural, what the mural symbolized, and kind of what, and people's interest in not seeing that go away. And I think that to that point, that creates a great opportunity, since it makes us talk about public art and recognize that while that can't stay, other more exciting, more engaging public art, and more of it can be part of the conversation moving forward in Uptown and elsewhere. And that is that's a great thing, that while unfortunately the mural is not able to be kept, that has been almost a catalyst potentially to more public art in the Uptown area. And I think that that's a real net positive for all the individuals out there who were focused and very intentional about wanting to promote public art. As to the deal itself and kind of the economics on it, one, the town is not writing a check or paying anything up front to the developer. The developer is creating value and creating economic activity and creating growth in our local economy, specifically within Uptown, from what currently is producing nothing, from a property tax standpoint. If Unit 5, us, everybody else is getting zero property tax revenue from the properties that we're talking today. Even taking that up to the original EAV is a positive. That is, you are going in the right direction, and once the time comes when the TIF is expired, then obviously the benefit increases dramatically even beyond that. Another is there was one comment made in public comment, if I heard it correctly earlier tonight, about vacancy and vacancy in the market in Uptown. And I think that having about 70% of the leasable space of this proposed project either committed or under letter of intent or being in active discussions is a great sign of the local market. I think it is a credit to the developers who are engaging in those conversations, those negotiations, and not all of those are just merely shuffling around from other parts of our community into this new building.
There are new concepts coming in, there are new businesses coming in, there are new jobs coming in, and that ultimately yields benefits economically, yields benefits for quality of life and everything else in Uptown. I'll end by talking about one of the things that drove me to originally run for council. When I first got elected, I was 25. I'm an ISU graduate, and I thought, and still do, that a tremendous opportunity that this community and that the town of Normal has is that we have outstanding institutions to educate people here in our community and here in Normal, be it ISU, be it Heartland, be it our skills and labor training. The educational opportunities that are here are top-notch, and they are outstanding. And about every year, there are 4,000 or so or more people who we educate in this community, teach them the skills and the knowledge, and the vast majority of which then graduate and take those skills, take that knowledge, take the energy and the willingness to work and the drive, and take that to the betterment of other communities. And how do we create an environment, or how do we foster an environment in Normal where more graduates and more people entering the workforce for the first time want to be and want to do that here in Normal and in this community? My personal thought is there are a couple factors that go into it. The first of which is they have to have an opportunity to. We have to have jobs in this community. We have to have good career opportunities in this community, and jobs that, in fields and in disciplines that, that fit today's economy and that are available and looking, that graduates are looking for. So not only being a place that people have the opportunity to be in, but also being a place that people want to be in, being a place that people want to live in and work in. And that is a facet that I think Normal has also done incredibly well with and been incredibly intentional about for some time. This building and this project that we're talking about tonight, I think, is one more step in that greater picture and in that greater mission of wanting to create an outstanding quality of place, wanting to continue to promote economic development, and continue to drive our economy forward. So for that, I am thankful for the time and the consideration of everybody who spoke and reached out, and also very thankful that this project is in front of us, and I look forward to hopefully continuing to move forward.
Mr. McCarthy, you had an additional comment?
Yeah, one thing I forgot. I did have an ask of staff. Reading through the entire 35-page development agreement, I learned, yeah, I did, so that we have several design and plan approval opportunities, and I know the next one is conceptual design.
Yes,
Okay.
we will see a concept design.
I've just asked that the council gets, I know we don't have to approve it or anything, but I'd like to see it and make that, make an opportunity available for the public to see those conceptual designs whenever. I know we didn't have the opportunity to get them before, but be able to make them public and available.
Yes, that won't be an issue. I've talked with Bush and Farnsworth even about having a public informational forum or a public open house when we have concept designs available to share. So we can certainly do that.
Thank you.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance authorizing a redevelopment agreement is approved. We have two items of new business tonight. The first is a resolution certifying and acknowledging the town's support of the OSLAD grant application for the Maxwell Park project.
Move approval.
Second.
Is there discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item 13 is an ordinance authorizing a license agreement with Illinois State University for the use of the College Avenue right-of-way between Main Street and Kingsley Street. Move approval.
Second.
Discussion on this item. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Before taking a motion for adjournment, concerns or comments? I would make one comment and congratulate Mr. Preston on his self-inflicted change of marital status. I know it takes two people to make that happen.
I don't
so-
know what she was thinking.
But congratulations. Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
And Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you. I don't want that. That was a good meeting. That was a darn good meeting. Yeah. Well, you know, wow. Hello. You sure can. That's okay.
So in the staff report, there was a nice line that says, staff believes the agreement presents an exceptional opportunity for commercial office space in prime town location. There's a lot in that. Can you kind of unpack that for me and tell me why that's beneficial?
I sure can. And what it is it's a change of how people view where they want to work. And for